on non-retreat days, you're meditating for about 2.5 hours a day. But then when we do these meditation retreats sessions, which you're meditating for 16 hours a day in complete silence.
I really enjoyed learning about today's guest's life journey and the twists and turns so far. He's at the beginning of what will undoubtedly be a long career, but it was just such a pleasure to chat with today's guest. I'm Jason Heath. This is Contrabass Conversations, and today we are featuring Desmond Bratton, who is a former student of both Lloyd Goldstein, one of my favorite people and a former podcast guest, as well as Nicholas Walker, past president for the ISB, another one of my favorite people, by the way. So Desmond and I talk about Lloyd, Nicholas, many topics, meditation. You'll see, I'll let him discuss it, but it was a really deep chat, particularly being on the bustling exhibit floor of the International Society of Bassists, sorry, long morning, International Society of Bassists 2019 convention. Thank you, Desmond, for chatting, and thank you to our sponsors, D'Addario Strings, and we were doing this chat at the D'Addario booth. Also, thank you to Upton Bass, the Bass Violin Shop, Texas Hill Country Bass Collective, A440 Violin Shop, and Goldstein Music. More on them later in this conversation, and I know you're going to love today's chat with Desmond Bratton. So Desmond, meeting in person for the first time.
Yes.
I've heard a lot about you, and we're at ISB 2019.
Yes.
Here in Bloomington, Indiana.
Yes.
And you right now are living in Ithaca, New
Yes,
York.
currently in Ithaca, New York.
Yeah, doing all kinds of things.
Doing a multitude of things, and still trying to figure it out. Trying to learn how to grow up and grow up as a bass player and as a human being. Yeah.
Well, let's go down that path that got you to Ithaca. So you grew up in Tampa.
Yeah, so I grew up in Tampa, and my first bass teacher was Lloyd Goldstein,
who is one of my favorite people.
Yes.
Probably one of your favorite people, too.
Yeah.
Can't say enough good things about Lloyd.
Yeah, I learned a lot from Lloyd. And Lloyd's whole thing with me from the very beginning was never really about, it wasn't result-oriented. It was always about the phrasing and how can you play this. This was when he was in the orchestra. He was still saying, how can you play this like you're playing for your grandmother, or how can you phrase this like to make someone moved?
Yeah.
And so I also always had this conflation between emotional content and the musical line, and that was always his message to me. And because I was more committed to other things during the course of our working together, like sports, I was more into sports. And so sometimes I would forget my bow or forget my bass even showing up to lessons. And so he would say, okay, we'll just do yoga. He was a yoga instructor at the time. So that was another thing that was always connected with me, this idea of awareness, bodily awareness and bass playing.
Wow.
And so yeah, that was some of my time with Lloyd, including taking long drives up to the George Vance workshops.
So you were involved in those.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Was that when George was still
alive?
Okay.
And
memories of George, because he's been some of my most common themes over the years. George Vance, Paul Ellison, many other things. So just anything that comes to mind when you think of George.
I remember George as a younger person. He kind of seemed like from the perspective of just showing up at the camp, like he was just sort of like a general of the camp, just running things, sort of all strict about time and but then later in the hangs, as I grew up going there, I would tag along with Lloyd to the hangs afterward, and he was a super laid back guy. And I remember one time hanging on the back porch with him, myself, Francois, Olivier Rabath, Francois' son, who's a character.
Yep.
And just hanging out, and so that was good to see him that way too. He's just a fun, relaxed guy. Loved biking. I remember us talking about that a lot.
Yeah.
And, but then on the way driving here, I was able to listen to a little bit of him in his own words.
Yeah, isn't that cool?
And get some understanding of who he was as a teacher and a philosopher, and not so concerned, and with a similar philosophy to what I care about with the bass. Like, how do you shape a human being and care about the development of the human being, which I didn't know as a student. I mean, I saw him putting the camps on, but I wasn't acting in the capacity of a teacher at that time.
Yeah.
So I wasn't thinking of him in that way.
Yeah. No, it's so interesting to listen to that. I'm so glad that audio got passed along to me. How unclear the path was. I mean, you know, I have this like book. It's nice and neat and tidy. His progressive repertoire series, and you worked with him. But like, it's so interesting for me too to see behind the scenes and how. I mean, the last thing that he probably had in his mind was that he would become this famous teacher. You know, it's just a really interesting path. Yeah,
that was one of the things that I heard him say that really struck me as a person sort of trying to find their own path. He said, it's surprising when somebody deems you a master in your craft, and you didn't even know it was coming. You know, and it just happens upon you. And so I'm trying to hear those words and hear that philosophy and sort of live by it, and not be afraid of the next move. You know.
Well, speaking of the next move, so you're with. Driving up to those with Lloyd, and was that in high school or after?
It was middle school through high school.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. So what happened then?
We just had a great time. You know, Lloyd kind of was like, in some ways like a brother, in some ways like a surrogate father in a way, and he would just tell me his life stories and just talk to me. So he would talk to me about his philosophy of music and what he cared about, and at that time too, he was a raw foodist.
Wow.
So so he would be starving, and we'd stop at Waffle House, and I would order the Grand Slam, and he would be eating seed cheese and a small salad, and I could just see him crying, and I was laughing. You know? But so we had a good time. It was like fun. It was so much fun, and I'll never forget that.
And then you finish high school?
Then I finished high school, and I went to Stetson University.
Is that where is that?
It's in DeLand, Florida.
Okay, I know the cello teacher there, David Biella, quite well. I actually play in an orchestra with him in Memphis, Tennessee, the Iris Orchestra.
The Iris Orchestra.
So I know the name Stetson well, but okay.
Yeah. So Biella was there, David was there, and I went there for one year, and then I decided to switch majors. I originally went there because I wanted to get a basketball scholarship, and I had been connecting with basketball coaches who were recruiting me there. But I was slated to get more money if I went for the music scholarship rather than, because I wouldn't get a full ride as a basketball player. So I went there in music, and I wasn't really prepared. I don't even know what I played for my audition, but it turned out that Biella and some of the other teachers knew Lloyd, and they were friends with him, and they were fond of his parrot named Downbow. So it was that connection that kind of helped me to get in there in a way, you know. And they saw my potential. I had musicality, but I didn't have a lot of skill, or you know. So I went there for 1 year, and then I switched majors to Middle Eastern history.
Wow. That's what had you always been interested in that?
I was interested in history, and I was inspired by a particular professor, Margaret Binsky, who was just a super knowledgeable, expanded human being who I was just inspired by her. So
I think Middle Eastern history is something I know the least about. I think Chinese history maybe ranks up there too, but that's fascinating. But you obviously probably know a lot about it.
Well, I didn't stay in that major for too long either.
Okay, so more than me maybe.
Yeah. But I think I was just overwhelmed with to begin to feel what it meant to take on the endeavor of playing bass as a profession. And so I started to get overwhelmed with that, and started like partying a lot, and just I think as a result of that, I was just overwhelmed with school. So that led me to leave school for a little over a year. And then I sort of got myself back on my feet. And in the interim, I was sort of using the double bass as a way, methodology for healing. You know, it was a way for me to center my mind and try to find some relaxation of my mind when I was going through chaotic times.
Wow.
And then I felt like, okay, well, I've been practicing, you know, a bunch of hours a day, every day. How can I, maybe I should audition for this other school, which was the local school, University of South Florida in Tampa.
Yep.
And I was with D. Moses there.
Sure, yeah.
And so I studied with him for a couple of years. And in the meantime, I was also playing some shows at the Moffitt Cancer Center with Lloyd in the lobby.
That's great.
And but yeah, just translating my obsessions from like partying to just bass playing. That's what that was. Yep. So I did that for 2 years, and then at I took a trip across country to San Francisco.
Did you really?
Yeah.
That's a drive.
That was a drive, and it was me and my girlfriend at the time, and we didn't have any money, but we said, should we go over, because I wanted to meet Nicholas Walker and spend some time with him and ask him if I could possibly audition for his school.
Yep.
And so we flipped the coin, and the coin said go, and we just stopped at friends' houses along the way and took I-10 and went all the way to San Francisco for the 2011 ISB.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right.
And
what'd you think of San Francisco?
It was great. I was conceived there, so I felt some connection to
wow.
that. Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. And that's where my parents lived there. My father lived there for 30 years, and my mother for like 15. So
was that your first time there? Yourself though?
As an adult.
As an adult. Okay.
Yeah. I went there a couple times as a younger kid, but it was pretty memorable. It was a super memorable trip actually. And
did you connect with Nicholas?
I did. So then that story is I show up and I saw Nicholas in a room similar to this in the and I think he was trying to sell one of his basses.
Yeah.
And so I sort of cornered him and I said, "Hey, what would it look like to study at your school as a grad student?" And he sort of gave me the run-of-the-mill answer like, "Oh, fill out the paperwork and here's the website and blah blah blah."
Yeah.
And then he just handed me a double bass. He said, "Here, play something." And I was only really playing the Bach Suite No. 1 at that time, and it was musical, but I was still figuring out technique,
right?
But I had the concept of the sound concept. That was always something that I really cared about, the Rabat sound concept. And so I just started playing, and I was really getting into it, and I was just had my head down. And then I looked up, and there was Ted Botsford and John Clayton was watching me, and Nick was there, and it was almost like they had formed a little semicircle around me, and it became like this little concert. And I was nervous, super nervous, but then I finished. And then John Clayton said, "Wow, that's a good sounding bass." And Nicholas said, "It's a good sounding player."
Oh, that's great. That's great.
So I was
wow.
like, oh, cool. So I think he saw some potential in me, and later came up to me and said, "Hey, let's keep this conversation open about you coming to Italy."
Samuel Goldstein, who founded Goldstein & Sons back 70 years ago at this point, Sam was largely self-taught. Here's Barry Goldstein about how his father got into the business.
You know, it was mainly self-taught, but I will pay homage to people that need to be paid homage. He did study a bit with Al Eisenstein, who was a great repairman in Manhattan. He was considered one of the top. And Al was very gracious. He allowed my father to sit at his side, watch him work. But a lot of it was self-taught. My father was a very ingenious person. He really would look at a problem and figure out 5 ways of doing it, and then choose the right way always.
Ever since those early years, Goldstein & Sons has been working to solve problems for bass players, provide them with ever better instruments and new opportunities in terms of travel basses. And cases, and all sorts of things that we need as bass players. Thank you, Barry, and thank you, Goldstein, for everything that you do and for sponsoring the podcast. Upton Bass is at a fascinating transition from selling accessories online, kind of in the early days, to selling other people's basses, to starting to make their own basses, which they now do and make over 120 a year. Here are Eric and Gary of Upton Bass on that transition.
So then we stopped getting containers of instruments,
Right, yeah.
which was
A lot of dough all at once, so it was taxing, and the quality was going down with every shipment, you know. And at that point, we were doing so much ourselves anyways, final assembly, varnish, setup. It was kind of a no-brainer to start making them in-house.
Whatever your playing needs are, Upton Bass will find you an instrument that works with your budget and that you will love for the long term. They have an amazing, loyal fan base that has bought, several people have bought 2, 3, even 4 Upton Basses over the years. They stand behind their products. They're beautiful instruments made in the Northeast in the United States. UptonBass.com, and thanks so much for sponsoring the podcast. This episode is brought to you by the Bass Violin Shop, which opened in 2001 as a small double bass workshop in Greensboro, North Carolina. Today, they're staffed by 3 full-time, highly skilled bass luthiers, and they specialize in double bass sales, rentals, setup, restoration, and repair. For nearly 20 years, they have satisfied thousands of clients by offering quality instruments, knowledgeable service, reliable repairs, and superior restorations at affordable prices. Did you know that they regularly ship basses nationally from coast to coast? Contact their team to find out more information about the shipping process and how you can get your dream bass delivered to your doorstep. For more information and current inventory, visit their website at bassviolinshop.com and be sure to follow them on Facebook and Instagram. So how long was it between then and when you actually did make the move?
So then I fill out the application that summer, and then I was enrolled in Ithaca and started in 2012, fall of 2012,
Wow.
for grad school. And yeah.
So what is Nicholas, or was, or however you want to frame it, Nicholas like as a teacher? What were those lessons like at that point?
The first, my first year there, 2012, he was on sabbatical. So it was Sean Conley.
Oh, well, okay.
Yeah.
There's a player.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's start with Sean.
Yeah, so Sean was cool. He was just kind of supportive, and he was just trying to figure me out. I think he was like showing me what he knew how to show me, and he wasn't as used to like developing a young student, but but the demonstration of him just living his life and living as a musician and was a super helpful example,
for sure.
and also seeing his freedom of doing cartwheels in the bass in the near the bass lockers in the near the practice rooms, and even going up to people like Andrew Ryan, who I went to school with there, and saying, "Hey, I'm really having trouble with my thumb here. What am I? What do you think about what I should do?" And Andrew was an undergrad at the time. He's like, "I don't know, man. You're the teacher." So. I think to see his humility and his ability to just play and just have a good time and ask questions to even the students and be honest and inquisitive about how he felt like there could be a reciprocal relationship of learning.
Wow.
So that was him.
And that was your first year.
That was my first year.
Then Nicholas comes back?
Then Nicholas comes back, and he had been observing the lessons of all of us because he films all our lessons.
Oh.
And so he had like a direct, it's probably a live stream of all of our lessons, so he was taking notes. He's a pretty meticulous dude, and so he had a whole plan for me as soon as I got back. But he never really... He was just very encouraging, and he throws a lot of information at you with the idea that you're being filmed, so you can go back and take the lesson notes and overlook and look it over in your free time, and really work on the things that you set out to be your own goals, which I think is a cool thing, which helped me to develop this idea of really having a goal and shaping my idea of what I wanted, and not having it a teacher-driven thing, you know, creating this notion of you being your own teacher.
Yeah.
And that was something that really stuck with me. And also just to see his work ethic. I think part of the thing with working with him is to try to emulate his work ethic.
Yeah.
You'll never catch that. You'll never be able to reach it. So your attempt to do it is raising your level in and of itself.
For sure. It's so important to be around people like that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. So I think that's how him as a teacher. But as far as my mechanics and stuff, in a lot of ways, he didn't really say much about the bow. He liked what I was doing with the bow, and he felt where I was coming from with the sound concept. And he helped me to organize my left hand, like with this framing, fractal framing stuff.
I have been geeking out on that like you wouldn't believe. I've been going through David Allen Moore's course that he put out recently on Discover Double Bass, and going through that. And I have yet to see David do that live, hopefully one of these days. But it's really interesting. It's really, I've only been doing it a couple of weeks, but it's really starting to change. I can see patterns I wasn't seeing before.
So I remember very clearly, like when because it was almost like a premonition. They said, hey, you know, keep doing this, and there'll be a point where your mind, you'll close your eyes and you'll see the frames, you'll see the shapes almost light up, you know. And Nicholas was always interested in relating it to chord changes. You know, okay, learn the chord changes to the box suite, see the frame, and be able to improvise over it, and then learn the tune. You know, so it helps me now to always see things within the context of chordal understanding. You know, is this a dominant seventh with the seventh in the bass, or what is, you know, what's the shape here? And so it's really expanded my harmonic understanding a lot, and to approach the bass pianistically like that.
So that was it only 2 years of graduate studies that you were doing there?
Yeah.
So this is a few years ago then at this point.
This was so I graduated there in 2014.
Okay.
And then from there, I was so kind of overwhelmed with the bass and with the darkness and the cold of Ithaca that I moved to the Ithaca Zen Center from there, and lived out in a meditation center on the outskirts of town for like the next 3 years.
Really?
Yeah.
Had you been meditating?
Yeah.
I know Lloyd meditates. I don't know if you picked it up then or...
Yeah. I think that's one of the ways that I got into it, is through doing yoga with Lloyd, and meditating was also a part of that.
So what I've never been to a meditation center. You're living there for 3 years. I mean, I'm assuming you're doing other things than just meditating, or maybe I'm wrong.
Well, you have to work when you live usually at a Zen center. There's a work requirement, but that work requirement is room and board. So you're working for 3 to 4 hours a day.
Yeah.
And but you're meditating on non-retreat days. You're meditating for about 2.5 hours a day. But then when we do these meditation retreats sessions, which you're meditating for 16 hours a day in complete silence. So, and in my other time there, in the summertime, that place becomes a raw food retreat center, which I was also into at that time. I was a raw foodist, actually. I ended up becoming a raw foodist, and I was doing that when I first moved to Ithaca, drinking juice, and that didn't quite work out with the no sun and the freezing cold. But so I was interested in that, and I would work at these raw food retreats, and they sort of allowed me to just practice a lot. You know, it gave me time to practice, and really changed my concept of what it means to be alive. Really, really revolutionized how I thought about myself as a person.
Wow.
And
I can't even imagine meditating for 2.5 hours, let alone 16 hours at a stretch. I follow many podcasts like Sam Harris and people who are deeply into meditation. So I do a little bit of extremely light meditation practice, very light. But so I'm familiar with the benefits and the concepts. But what? So you were there for 3 years?
Yeah.
And then you moved on.
And then the third year I was still living there, but I was working I got a job working at Cornell University teaching there. And so I was living at the Zen Center and teaching as an adjunct at Cornell. And then also teaching at a school in Ithaca called Opus Ithaca.
Yep.
In downtown Ithaca, and then teaching privately as well. Yeah.
Do you still meditate regularly?
Yes, I usually meditate for about an hour in the morning and an hour in the evening if I can. But yeah, and it kind of lined up with my bass playing, you know.
Well, that's what I was wondering about.
Yeah.
Like how that affects your musicianship, your bass playing, creative activities, composition, or anything along the lines. What? Because I know that you're not mentally composing while you're meditating, certainly, or at least I'm assuming you're not. But
yeah, you're trying not to.
You're right. You're maybe trying not to.
Yeah.
But how do those activities in your life interact with each other?
I think I would go, you know, sometimes we would have a morning scale routine at Ithaca College. And so I would go to the Zen Center. They sit at 5:30. So I would go up to the Zen Center at 5:30. I would sit for an hour and a half and then come back down and then work on scales in preparation for scales class. And I think what it allowed me to do was allow the bass to be the predominant experience in a room. I think a lot of times the way we train is to always analyze and be critically aware of all the things we're doing, be it vibrato or the fractal fingerings or what have you. But there's another position that I think Francois talks about, it like an observatory position that you can get in where and this is talked about in relation to performing, but where you're observing the body just do things and you're watching the body rather than constantly commenting. And so when people talk about what are the benefits of meditation, I think it just allows me to actually hear the instrument clearly and allow the sound to take up the space in my mind rather than my own thoughts, you know. So then I'm deeply listening in the present moment rather than thinking about what I'm listening to. And I think that translates to performance because it puts you into a space that my belief is that that's what the consumers of music are looking for. They're looking for the space that precedes and succeeds the music. So, you know, if you can get into that space and feel that space prior to playing your first note, then the audience can open up and be vulnerable and enter that space. And then it becomes a successful performance, not necessarily because you hit all the notes or you did everything right, because you were able to caress people's experience and allow them to enter that space and move people. And but not by any virtue of your own, just because you got out of the way, actually. Yeah. And the meditation is the process of learning to get out of the way.
This episode is brought to you by D'Addario Strings. Our friends at D'Addario want to help listeners change their strings safely and efficiently, and they have a few tricks to help you achieve that. Apply graphite, like pencil lead, to the bridge and nut, the contact points of the string, to ensure the strings slide smoothly on their way up to tension. This prevents them from getting stuck and unwinding or pulling the bridge so that it leans. Learn more at orchestral.daddario.com, and thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast. This episode is brought to you by the Texas Hill Country Bass Collective. Join them July 22nd through July 25th for their 6th annual Austin Bass Workshop. Come join friends from the area for 4 days of music, bass, and fun, and work with 2019 featured guest artist and former podcast guest Dennis Whitaker. Learn more at TexasHillCountryBassCollective.com. You know, Sam Harris, who I love his podcast, and he wrote a book called Waking Up, and he has an app called Waking Up, and he describes it in a way that really resonated with me. Like most of us, especially people that aren't meditating, we're walking around with this constant mental dialogue. We don't realize we're talking to ourselves all the time. We're really like living in a dream in a way, and you're actually waking up by getting into that state. You're making me want to go meditate more.
Yeah, it's true. And the thing is that if you do have that experience of clarity, it's so antithetical to the value systems of the talking mind, which is the value systems of pretty much everybody you're interacting with. So then it doesn't really benefit you per se as far as, oh, it's going to help me get this job, or it's not goal oriented. Right. Once again, it's just, oh, I'm just here. But I do know that people like to feel it. So if you're feeling warm inside and clear, it helps other people feel that, and it's amazing what just sort of happens as a result of just trying to live clearly on a regular basis, and making that your focus. But I'm learning how to incorporate or have it as part of my daily life, with that has goals and strategies on how to get better or whatever, because it's not that you would never ask a bird, how is it going to improve its singing today?
It's a good analogy. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's just happening, and
it's really interesting.
Yeah.
What we start off before we hit record on this, just talking about what you're up to outside of meditating in Ithaca right now, and so you're doing some teaching. And I was actually just chatting with Stuart, a law professor at Cornell, who's been taking lessons with you, who raves about you, and is really so you're doing some teaching at Cornell.
Yeah, teaching at Cornell, teaching privately, and former Dean Stuart Schwab is one of my students.
Yeah, and if I remember right, and I was talking about this with him. So this is super cool. You presented with him at the United Nations.
Yeah.
Okay,
that was this past year. Yeah.
And just you, younger guy, he older guy, but you, the teacher, him, the student. Right? Is there something? Just talk about that. You'll do better than me.
So he was asked to present at the United Nations. On the topic of avocational learning. So the importance of what somebody who's not a professional taking up study in something outside of their field. And it was the purpose of it, I think, was to talk to diplomats and ambassadors on, okay, what would it mean for you to go take a music lesson or take some painting lessons and do something else. And so he asked me if I wanted to come along, and I thought, all right, that'd be a funny story. I would do that. So we had an amazing time, and for me, I think what I added to it was this feeling that to watch a dean, which is at a dean at an Ivy League school, is a super prestigious position, and it has a lot of power over budget, and
someone who is like the kind of the apex of their career, something like that, and then doing something avocational, being an amateur. And he has this enthusiasm about being an amateur. So I was so inspired just talking.
And that's what inspired me, I think, and that's what I mentioned during the course of the talk that we gave, was like, here's this guy who's humbled himself to come down and just be a student and really be a student, not like there's no air about him when he's the student. He's not saying I'm a dean being a student. He might as well be, one of my 9-year-old students. He's just willing to get interested, willing to learn, willing to have open conversations about the relationship between his personal life and the bow arm, which is something I'm constantly thinking about because the instrument has always been a modality for healing for me. I'm always relating personal issues or stuck spots in my personal life with how do I move this bow, Why am I holding, in the same way, why am I holding my bow arm? Why am I holding on to stuff in my life, And so I'm always relating, that's sort of the way I teach in that way. And so I can have those conversations with him about those aspects of his personal life, but also, what's going on with Roe v. Wade, or any of the major legal cases in the Supreme Court. We're talking about them, and so I'm learning too. His perspective. And because he was the clerk of the court for Justice Sotomayor, so he knows. He knows his stuff,
Yeah, and it's all influencing everything, right? I love thinking about like how your bow arm's being affected by all these other things, and I think about that all the time as I perform these days and get up there, and I'm continuing to evolve too. I remember moving out to San Francisco in 2016, and I'm playing for the Golden Gate Bass Camp, which I'm wearing the shirt for that right now, and I get up there, and I look, I'm about to play some solo bass, and who's sitting in the audience? Rufus Reed, right next to Diana Gannett, right next to you name it. This whole like all these people, and Jason 20 years ago would have been freaking out. But I think I've gotten to this point where I was thinking, this music is coming, and it's a gift, and I'm the steward of this gift, and allow me to share this music with you, which is something that I really had a hard time doing back when I was in my 20s or even in my 30s. Yeah. And so it's really interesting to think but I've become a lot more calm and accepting in other areas of my life, and I think it's starting to, these are very porous borders between these various areas of our life. Right.
And I ran into a kid who saw me with the bass on the street a couple of weeks ago, and I was playing in the parks, and sometimes I go to the parks and just play, and have different people come up, and this kid came up and he said, "You know what this big violin, it looks like it can do it. I think you should use it to play calm down songs for people." And I thought that was an interesting statement for an 8-year-old kid to make. One, because he saw the potential of the double bass to provide a sense of calm to people around him, which he may or may not have been experiencing in his personal life. And he just had the intuition that this instrument could do that in a way. And it just reminded me of the potential for our instrument to help mold us in the same, and I think a lot of times we're trying to find out what it can do for us or where we can go with it. But we're not. Meanwhile, we're experiencing these tones, and it's going into our body, and it's influencing our lives, and we're growing up, and it's a whole, like you said, it's a whole interactive process. Between the bass and ourselves. So I think it's beautiful, and I think it's important because it's countercultural. We're in a culture that's kind of getting more and more moving, fast paced, energetic. And here's this box from the 16th century. How does it fit in our life? It doesn't really. It goes against the current of the current society.
And maybe that's a beautiful thing.
I think it is. I think it is. I think that's its message. Let's slow down. And so I think it's good to feel grateful for that and really see it as a gift, as you said, and allow me to be a steward of that gift. I like that. It's tight.
Beautiful, man. I'm honored to get a chance to chat with you. This is great. You got a lot of life ahead of you, so I can't wait. Let's not have this be the only time we chat. I want to do a round 2 with you and a round 3, and I can't wait to see where life takes you.
I appreciate that. I hope to do it again. Thank you. Thank you.
Desmond, thanks for chatting. Hopefully this is the first of many. I'll link up to his Ithaca College faculty page, but he does many things, as you heard from this episode, so definitely follow him on social media and stay connected, and you and I both, I'm sure, can't wait to see what he does next. Thank you for listening. Thank you for writing in. Thank you for passing the podcasts around and sharing the word and joining our email list and forwarding those emails to family and friends and downloading our app and sharing things through the app. I know all of those things are happening, and I'm so appreciative and grateful for people that do that. And if you want to learn how to do any of those things, ContrabassConversations.com is our website, and hopefully it's clear enough to find everything from there. Contrabass Conversations is produced by Michael Cooper, Steve Hinchy, Trevor Jones, and Mitch Mooring, award-winning bass maker, by the way, won the silver medal for tone at the ISB 2019 convention and competition and all that good stuff. Learn more about Mitch at mitchmooring.com. And thank you to Krista Copper of the Backstage Creative Podcast for all her work cataloging and organizing everything we talk about on this podcast. I'm your host, Jason Heath, and we will see you again soon for more life on the low end of the spectrum.